4 property managers had walked away from Serena Voss in 14 months. The agencies had stopped apologizing when they called to say another one wouldn't be coming back. By the time a 33-year-old single father with a cracked truck bumper and 6 weeks of overdue rent rang the service entrance bell on a Thursday morning in March, no one in that building expected him to last through the week. What no one knew, not the housekeeper who answered the door, not the CFO 50 floors away, already circling like a patient crow, and certainly not Serena herself, who had not laughed in 11 years and had built her silence into something that could pass for strength, was that this man was going to say the stupidest, most accidental thing she had ever heard, and that it was going to change everything. Stay with this to the very end, and when you get there, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to know how far this one travels. The morning Remy Holt arrived at the address he'd been given was the kind of cold that made Denver feel honest about itself. Not the theatrical cold of a storm, just the flat, gray, unapologetic cold of a March morning that hadn't yet decided to become spring. He had the address written on the back of a receipt because his printer had run out of ink 3 weeks ago and he hadn't replaced the cartridge, because the cartridge cost $19, and $19 was the same as a week of B's lunches. He sat in the truck for a moment before he got out. Not because he was nervous. He had told himself, on the drive over, that he was not nervous. He had a trade. He had references. He had 11 years of facilities and property management work, and he knew how to fix things that broke and maintain things that hadn't broken yet, and anticipate problems before they became expensive. That was the job. That was his skill set. The woman who lived in this house was famous for being difficult, and difficult people were not his problem. Leaking pipes were his problem. A failing elevator was his problem. A woman who had gone through 4 property managers in 14 months was a data point, not a deterrent. He got out of the truck. The house was set back from the street behind a low stone wall and a gate with an intercom panel, and it wasn't what he had expected. He had expected something that announced itself, glass and angles and the architectural equivalent of a raised voice. What he found instead was a large, older building, early 20th century, solid and well-maintained, sitting in a quiet block of similar structures the way a word settled into a sentence. It had been renovated clearly and carefully, but the renovation hadn't tried to change what the building was. The ramp at the side entrance was new and well-built. The path from the gate was wider than code required. Someone had thought about the details. He noted that. Details that someone had thought about were easier to maintain than details someone had thrown in at the end. Ada answered the side entrance when he rang. She was a woman who moved without wasting motion and looked at him with the particular assessment of someone who had watched many people come through this door and had formed opinions about all of them. "Mr. Holt," she said. "That's right. I'm Ada. I manage the household." She stepped back to let him in. "Ms. Voss will see you in the office at 9. It's 8:40 now. I'll show you the maintenance records while you wait." She walked him through the house with the efficient pace of someone for whom time was a resource she didn't waste. He noted the lift between the ground and first floors, the modified kitchen counters, the low switches, the wide bathroom doorway he could see from the hall. The modifications were thorough and integrated rather than added on, which told him either the renovation had been planned thoughtfully or someone had gone back afterward and done it properly. Either way, it had been done by someone who understood the difference between compliance and use. The previous manager, Ada said, without turning around, didn't read the maintenance log before his first week. Ms. Voss had to tell him about the elevator sensor issue herself. That was his first and last mistake. "What happened with the other 3? Remy asked. Ada paused briefly at a door. "Different reasons," she said. Same result. She showed him into the maintenance room, which was organized with the kind of meticulous logic that came either from genuine system or from someone who had been forced by chaos to create one. Service records back 4 years. A prioritized fault list. A handwritten annotation system that tracked which contractors had been used for what and whether they'd been called back. Someone had cared about this. He suspected it was Ada. He read for 15 minutes. When she came back, she led him to the ground floor office. He had known, from the employment agency, from the brief job listing, from the single name search he'd done the night before, that Serena Voss used a wheelchair. He had also known she had founded Voss Capital Intelligence at 26, that the company now employed 340 people, that it was a data analytics and market intelligence firm with a client list that read like a financial industry trophy case. He had known she was 38 and that she had been in an accident 11 years ago. He had not known what to expect when he walked into the room. What he found was a woman sitting very straight behind a desk that was lower than standard, adapted, obviously, with 2 screens in front of her, a phone to her left, a notepad with dense handwriting beside it, and the expression of someone who had been interrupted from something more important and was giving you 30 seconds to justify the interruption. She wore a dark blouse and no jewelry. Her hair was dark and pulled back without a strand out of place, and she was, in the objective neutral sense, striking. Not in the way that had anything to do with beauty specifically, but in the way that some faces had a force of architecture to them. You couldn't look at her face and not understand immediately that it had been arranged by years of deliberate control. "Mr. Holt," she said. Not a greeting. A label. "Miss Voss?" he said. "Sit down." He sat. She looked at him across the desk for a moment without speaking. Her eyes were gray and completely steady. Whatever she was deciding it with the economy of someone who had done this assessment many times and had refined the process down to its essential components. "You've worked in property and facilities management for 11 years, she said. "You have 3 employer references, one of which is your previous supervisor at a commercial building in Thornton, and 2 of which are residential clients. You're self-employed now, have been for 2 years. Before that, you had a staff position at a property management firm." She looked at him directly. "You left the firm." "I did. The reference from your supervisor there is positive but brief. Unusually brief. My wife was diagnosed while I was in that job," Remy said. "It took 2 years. I needed flexibility that a staff position couldn't give me. Going independent was the practical solution." A pause. "And your wife?" "She died 3 years ago." He said it plainly, not to preempt pity, but because it was a fact that explained other facts, and he had learned that the most efficient way to provide context was to provide it directly. "My daughter is 7. She's at school now. I have after-school coverage through her school program until 6, and my neighbor Mrs. Ferreira handles emergencies. I've worked out the coverage thoroughly because I understood the job description required it." Serena looked at him for a moment. 4 people have held this position since last year. "I read the maintenance log while I was waiting," Remy said. "The elevator sensor was replaced in November by a contractor who used the wrong calibration spec. It'll drift again within about 6 months. The hot water pressure in the first-floor bathroom suite is lower than it should be, which is probably the thermal expansion valve on the main tank. The external gate intercom is on its original wiring from the renovation, which is 9 years old. And the intermittent connection issue in the maintenance log will become a permanent failure inside a year. None of those are emergencies yet, but they will be if they're not addressed in order." Serena did not react. She was very still, in the way that was not stillness so much as complete focus. "The last property manager," she said, "came into this office on day 1 and described himself as someone who liked to solve problems before they happened." "I can see why that would be an unreliable statement," Remy said. "Go on, it's easy to say. It means something specific when someone's read your maintenance records, done the math, and given you a prioritized list before the interview's over. It means nothing when it's said by someone who hasn't." The silence lasted long enough that he heard the sound of Ada somewhere in the house. A drawer closing. And then quiet again. "The position pays a flat monthly retainer covering on-site days and emergency availability," Serena said finally. "There's a separate contractor budget you manage directly and report on weekly. On-site hours are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 8 to 4, plus an emergency contact number that I will use if something breaks that I cannot wait until the next scheduled day to address. My schedule requires that you work around it, not the reverse. If that's going to be a problem, tell me now." "It won't be," Remy said. "You'll need a gate code and Ada's number." She looked at him for another moment. "The last manager organized my maintenance files alphabetically by contractor name. I need them organized by system and service date." I'll have that reorganized by end of day Friday, he said. She nodded once, the kind of nod that was an acknowledgement rather than an approval. Then she looked back at her screen, which was the end of the interview. He stood. Mr. Holt, she said, not looking up. Miss Voss, the elevator sensor, the thermal valve, the intercom wiring. She said each one with the flat precision of a list. Fix them in that order. Yes, he said. He let himself out of the office. Ada was in the hallway, which he suspected was not a coincidence, and she handed him a sheet with the gate code, the contractor list, the emergency number, and her own extension. She did it without comment, which was its own kind of welcome. She'll have corrections for the first 3 things you fix, Ada said quietly, walking him to the service entrance. Not because you've done them wrong. Just so you know. I'll do them right and take the corrections, Remy said. Ada looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Good, she said. And then she opened the door, and he stepped back out into the cold March morning. He sat in the truck again for a moment before he started it. He calculated roughly what this contract would cover. The rent. The truck. 2 months afloat. He thought about Bea asleep this morning when he'd left, one arm out from under the blanket, her face completely relaxed in the way that only small children's faces were completely relaxed, with the specific absence of the guardedness that came later. He thought about the 7 months she had been at this school, about the fact that she'd finally made a friend, a girl named Priya, who she talked about with the intensity of a diplomat describing a crucial alliance. He started the truck, the elevator sensor, the thermal valve, the intercom wiring. He'd start Monday. He started Monday. The elevator sensor took him 4 hours, and he did it correctly the first time, recalibrating to the manufacturer's original specification, which was in a PDF on the manufacturer's website that the previous contractor apparently had not located. He documented the work, logged the calibration number, noted the expected next service interval, and updated the maintenance record. No one mentioned it. On Wednesday, he replaced the thermal expansion valve on the hot water tank. He ordered the part from a supplier he had used for a decade at a price 30% below the rate the previous contractor had charged. He tested the pressure at 3 points after the replacement and logged the readings. He updated the maintenance record. Ada brought him coffee while he was writing up the report. She didn't explain why. Thank you, he said. The woman at the agency, Ada said, not particularly directing this to him or away from him, who called this morning to check on how it was going. What did you tell her? That it was going, Ada said, and went back to the kitchen. He didn't see Serena on Wednesday. Her door was closed when he arrived and closed when he left, and there was no reason for her to emerge and no reason for him to enter. He worked around the perimeter of the house the way he always worked, methodically, without drama, doing the things that needed doing and leaving the evidence that they had been done in the neat columns of the maintenance log. On Friday, he started on the intercom wiring. This was a longer job. The original conduit ran through 2 walls and an exterior chase, and the wiring itself needed to be replaced rather than patched if it was going to hold. He estimated 2 days. He ordered the materials, prepared the route, and on Friday he opened the first wall. Serena's office door opened at 11. She came out in the motorized chair she used when she was moving through the house, and she moved through the hallway with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned the geography of her own space so precisely that it required no conscious thought. She came to a stop at the door to the room where he was working and looked at the opened wall. "You're replacing the entire run," she said. "The wiring is 9 years old, and the insulation is degrading in 3 places I've found so far. Patching it now means doing this job again in 18 months. She looked at the wall for a moment. "That's 4 days of work, not 2. 2 days if the chase is clear. 4 if there's any obstruction I can't see from outside. I won't know until I'm in." He kept his voice even. "If it's 4 days, I can give you a daily progress report and tell you after day 1 whether it's tracking 4 or 2. The contractor budget. I priced it. It's within the quarterly maintenance allocation. I'll have the numbers to you by end of day." She looked at him for another moment. He noticed that her hands on the chair controls were completely still. She had very good stillness. The The particular kind that came not from being naturally calm, but from having taught yourself to be calm, because the alternative was something you'd decided not to be. Fine, she said. And she went back to her office. He looked at the wall and went back to work. The intercom job took 3 days. He logged every hour, every material cost, every decision point. When he finished, the system worked the way it should have worked for 9 years, and the intercom panel outside responded with the crisp, immediate connection it was built to deliver. He tested it 4 times from the gate. Ada buzzed him in on the 4th test. "I know it works," she said through the speaker. "You can stop testing." "One more," Remy said. For the record, on his way out that day, Serena's office door was open for the first time. Not fully, just enough that the edge of her desk was visible, and beyond it the window, and on the windowsill, a series of objects placed at intervals with the particular arrangement of things that have not been moved in a long time. A small bronze figure, a stack of books, and on the shelf above, set back, turned away from the room, a small wooden box, dark walnut, maybe 8 inches long, with a brass latch that caught the light from the window. He couldn't see what was on the lid from where he stood. He didn't stop to look. He pulled the door to his truck, checked his phone, B's after-school text. A string of emojis that he had decoded over 7 months into a fairly reliable emotional report. Today the bee and the apple together meant she'd had a good day, and he drove home through the gray Denver afternoon thinking about the next week's work list. He didn't think about the box. Not that day. The second week established the pattern that would define the weeks that followed. Remy arrived Monday mornings with a work list prioritized by urgency, cross-referenced against the maintenance record and the contractor schedule, and he worked through the list with the particular focus of someone who had learned that the best way not to think about difficult things was to be continuously useful. He fixed the drip at the outdoor hose bib. He recaulked the shower surround in the accessible bathroom where the original seal had begun to peel at the corners. He inspected the lift, not because anything was wrong with it, but because the lift was the kind of thing you inspected when it wasn't broken, rather than when it was. Serena Voss did not make any of this easy. Not in the way he had been warned about. She wasn't cruel in the theatrical sense. There were no thrown objects, no scream dismissals, no spectacular confrontations that would have explained, in a narrative sense, why 4 people had quit. What she did was more precise and harder to deflect. She had standards so specific and so internally consistent that the only way to meet them was to understand them completely. And she communicated them as if they were obvious, which meant that the gap between what you'd done and what she wanted appeared not as a reasonable correction, but as a failure of basic competence. She told him, in the second week, that the maintenance log headers were in the wrong font. The log was a working document he'd been maintaining in a spreadsheet she'd given him access to, and the headers were in a slightly bolder weight than the body text, which was what he had assumed a header was for. The previous format, she said, pointing at a printed copy of the original log from 3 years ago, used uniform weight throughout. The hierarchy is communicated by indentation, not formatting. He looked at the printed copy and at his own. He could see, looking carefully, the distinction she was describing. "I'll reformat it today," he said. "All 3 months of entries." Yes, she looked at him steadily. Most people, she said, would point out that it's a small thing. "It's your log," he said. "I want it the way you use it." She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to her screen. He went back to work. He reformatted the log that afternoon, all 3 months, and emailed her the updated version. She did not reply. He took that as confirmation that it was correct. The corrections came steadily, with the regularity and specificity of a woman who had organized her dissatisfactions with the same precision she brought to everything else. The way he wrote the date format in the weekly expense summary, she used Yaye MMDD, not MM/DD/Yaye. The contractor billing code she used for a specific repair category that he hadn't known existed. The order in which he was expected to report items in the verbal summary she'd asked for on Friday afternoons, not chronological, not by urgency, but by the division of the maintenance budget they drew from, which required him to reorganize his own tracking system to match. He made the corrections. He He didn't explain them or qualify them or apologize for them. He just did them, logged them, and moved forward. It was, he discovered, a kind of test he recognized. Not from property management, from something older than that. Kara, in her last year, had needed things done exactly right, because exactness was the one thing she could still insist on when everything else was out of her control. He had learned then that correcting something perfectly, without grievance, was its own kind of care. That meeting precision with precision was a form of respect that went beyond what the word accommodation could carry. He didn't apply this insight consciously to Serena Voss. He just worked the way he always worked and let the corrections come. On the Thursday of the second week, he was in the office. Not to speak to her, there was a stuck drawer in the built-in cabinet unit along the east wall that Ada had flagged 2 weeks before and that he'd been working around to until he had the right lubricant and the right 15-minute window. The office itself was empty. Serena was at a physio appointment that Ada had mentioned in passing. One of the 3 per week sessions that were on the calendar the way a fixed point was on a map. He got the drawer open, the runner had bent slightly, which he straightened carefully, and then relubricated the slides and pushed the drawer back in 3 times to confirm it ran clean. Then he stood up. He stood up too fast. He always stood up too fast from low work, because his knees were 33 and had 15 years of crouching in front of them. His head connected with the underside of the desk with a sound that was considerably louder than he had anticipated. The kind of sound that came with a genuine burst of white at the edge of his vision and an involuntary and completely undignified yelp, not a word. Not a profanity, just a short, surprised sound that a person made when something hurt before the reasoning part of their brain had time to intervene. He staggered 1 step back. His hand went out to catch himself against the bookshelf. The wooden dice box, the small walnut box with the brass latch that he had noticed 3 weeks ago on the upper shelf, wobbled on its perch and then, with the particular unhurried commitment of an object that has made a decision, fell off the edge and landed on his head, square on the crown, and stayed there. The brass latch caught in his hair just enough to hold it in position. He went completely still. The box was on his head like a small, dignified hat. His hand was still on the bookshelf. His other hand was pressed to the back of his skull, where it had made contact with the desk. His eyes were watering from the impact. And the box was sitting on his head in the terrible silence of the empty office. He did not move. He did not move, because he was, in the most fundamental physical sense, uncertain whether movement would make any of this better or significantly worse. And so he stood very still with the box on his head and waited for the situation to resolve itself, which it showed no signs of doing. He became aware of a sound behind him. He turned his head very slowly. Serena Voss was in the doorway. She had come back from her appointment early. He learned later that the appointment had been at an office 4 blocks away rather than the hospital he'd assumed. And she had dismissed the driver and come back in the chair herself because she preferred it on days when the weather was clear enough to manage the route. And she was stopped in the doorway of her own office, with her hands on the chair controls, and the expression of a person who is looking at something they did not expect to find and is experiencing a response to it that they also did not expect. The box was on his head. He looked at her. She looked at him. He could see it happening on her face, whatever it was. Something was moving across the surface of an expression he had only ever seen as controlled. Not breaking it open, not splitting it, but moving across it the way a wind moved across still water, changing the surface without changing what was beneath. It escaped. One sound, short, involuntary, not a word and not a breath, but a laugh. A real one, the kind that came from somewhere below the chest, the kind that didn't wait for permission, and it was almost instantly gone, because her hand came up to her mouth, and she stopped it, pressed it back in, and she was looking at him with an expression that was no longer controlled at all, and was, under the control she was trying to reimpose, something like frightened. He didn't move. The box was still on his head. He reached up, carefully, and removed the wooden box and held it in both hands and set it back on the shelf, turning it to the same angle it had been at before. Then he straightened, tucked in the place on his scalp that still throbbed, and picked up his toolkit. Runner on the bottom drawer was bent, he said. His voice was completely even. I've straightened and lubricated it. It should run clean now. He walked out of the office. He walked down the hallway to the maintenance room and sat down on the low stool beside the utility bench and pressed the back of his hand to the bump forming on his skull and said nothing to anyone about anything. Ada appeared in the doorway 2 minutes later with a bag of frozen peas, which she handed to him without comment. She keeps these for, Ada began. Emergencies, Remy said. Yes, he pressed the frozen peas to the back of his head and stared at the maintenance board on the wall. Ada disappeared as quietly as she'd arrived. He thought about the sound he'd heard. He thought about the way the expression on Serena Voss's face had moved, and how quickly she had stopped it, and about the look in her eyes afterward. Not embarrassment, not the social awkwardness of being caught in a moment of reaction, but something rawer than that. Something that looked like a person who had been surprised by their own face. He had seen that before. In a hospital room 3.5 years ago. On Kara's face, the day after a particularly brutal round of treatment, when he had accidentally spilled an entire cup of coffee on his own shoe and swore in a specific way that she found, for some reason neither of them could explain, extremely funny. And she had laughed, and immediately her expression had gone through exactly that. The shock of it, the ambush of joy in the middle of grief, the face of a person surprised by themselves. He pressed the frozen peas harder against the bump on his skull and looked at the maintenance board. He would come back on Monday. He came back on Monday. There was no mention of the drawer incident. No acknowledgement, no correction, no observation. He arrived, signed in on the logbook Ada kept by the service entrance, reviewed the week's list, and started on the external drainage inspection he'd been planning. Serena Voss came out of her office at 10. She didn't look at him particularly. She went to the kitchen for something, passed through the hallway where he was checking the floor drain cover, and came back. The only difference was that she did not slam the office door when she returned. She had, before this, always closed it firmly, not aggressively, but with a decisiveness that said the office was the office and the rest of the house was the rest of the house. Today she left it half open. He noticed. He did not remark on it. At 11, she sent him an email, a question about the timeline for resealing the external window frames, which was a job he'd put on the Q2 list, and whether it could be moved earlier given the forecast. He replied with a cost estimate and a practical note about temperature requirements for the sealant. She replied immediately with approval. No corrections to the format. No secondary observations. He filed this data point with the others. On Wednesday, he was in the garden, the private courtyard at the back of the property, which was walled and had been designed for accessibility, but had fallen behind on seasonal maintenance, raking the dead material out of the beds and cutting back the ornamental grasses that had been left to go wild since autumn. It was slow work, the kind he found useful because it required attention without consuming it entirely, and he was about 40 minutes in when he heard the door open. Serena came out. She had a cup of something. Coffee, he thought, from the steam, and she stopped her chair on the accessible paving near the door and looked at the garden without saying anything. He kept working. After a while, she said, "The previous manager called a gardening service for this." "I can do it," Remy said. "It's in scope for the maintenance contract." "That's not an objection." A pause. "I just mean it was left for 3 months because they hadn't gotten around to arranging the service." He didn't say anything. He raked. "The iris bed on the left," she said after a moment. "The bulbs need separating. They've been crowded for 2 seasons. I can do that today if you tell me what depth you want them replanted at." 6 inches. The same as they were. He moved to the iris bed and started on it. She stayed where she was, which he noticed but did not make anything of. It was her house. She could be in it wherever she chose. After another 15 minutes, she said, "My husband planted those." He kept working. He liked gardening, she said. "I didn't particularly. I've kept the plants alive because..." She stopped. "I've kept them." He looked at the iris bulbs in his hand. They were fat and healthy, properly dormant, crowded but not damaged. Good root structure. They'd bloom well once they had room. "These will come up strong this year," he said. "They've got good energy in them." He replanted the bulbs in even rows at 6 inches, pressed the soil around each one, and watered the section from the standpipe. When he was done, he moved back to the ornamental grasses. He heard her go inside about 10 minutes later. The door opened and closed, and the garden was quiet again. He finished the grasses and the bed cleanup and made a note in the maintenance log: iris bulbs separated and replanted, 6-inch depth, eastern courtyard. Garden in good overall condition. Recommend seasonal fertilization in 2 weeks. He did not write down anything else about the morning. On Friday, he was completing his weekly report when Ada appeared at the door of the maintenance room. "She'd like a 5-minute verbal summary," Ada said. "When you're ready." "I'm ready now," he said. He went to the office. The door was fully open. She was at her desk, both screens on. She had a pen in her hand and the notepad beside her with the dense handwriting, and she was, not looking at the wooden box exactly, but looking in that direction, which was a different thing. When he came in, she looked at him instead. "Go ahead," she said. He gave her the summary in the format she wanted, by budget division, most significant to least, with timeline and cost confirmed against the quarterly allocation. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she made a note on the pad. "The ceiling on the east-facing windows," she said. "Add the west-facing ones to the same job." "Consistent, yes," he said. He turned to go. "Mr. Holt," she said. "Miss Voss?" She looked at him. Something in her expression had the quality of a person who has been standing at a door for a long time and is deciding whether or not to open it. "The garden," she said. "Next Wednesday. If you're planning to be there again." "I am," he said. A brief pause. "The rosemary on the south wall needs attention," she said. "It was Felix's." He nodded once. He didn't ask who Felix was. She hadn't offered it as an explanation, and it wasn't his to pursue. "I'll take care of it," he said. He walked out. In the truck on the way to pick up B, he thought about what he had observed that week. He thought about the office door, left open and then fully open. He thought about the garden. He thought about the one sound that had escaped from a woman who had, by all accounts and all observable evidence, kept herself completely sealed against that particular kind of escaping for a very long time. He thought about the wooden box, and the brass latch, and the name he still didn't know that he suspected was engraved on the lid. He picked up B, who told him about Priya's new shoes with the same detailed seriousness she brought to all important topics, and he listened properly and asked the right questions, and by the time they got home, he was thinking about what B wanted for dinner, and whether he had all the ingredients. And the wooden box was in the back of his mind where it stayed, quietly. Like a locked door he was in no hurry to reach. There were mornings when Serena Voss woke up and could feel, before she was fully awake, the weight of the day already assembled and waiting. Those mornings were the ones she organized herself against most precisely. The schedule was not a performance of control. It was a physical structure that held shape when she needed shape. That required her to move forward in increments of time rather than in the undifferentiated mass that grief preferred. You could not grieve the hour between 9 and 9:30 when 9 to 9:30 had a conference call in it. You could not stay in the country of loss when the country of the day had already made its demands. She had been running her company this way for 11 years. Voss Capital Intelligence had begun as a data analytics consultancy she had founded out of her apartment at 26, with a laptop and a specific theory about how large financial institutions were misreading their own market intelligence data. The theory had been correct. Within 18 months, she had 3 enterprise clients and was sleeping 4 hours a night, which she found sustainable in the way that things are sustainable when you are young and haven't yet understood what sustainability costs. Then she had met Felix. She didn't think about this deliberately. It came in fragments, the way things did, a detail of his handwriting on the back of a receipt she found in an old coat pocket, the smell of the specific coffee he'd drunk, which she had never purchased since, because she didn't want to. The way he had laughed, which was generously and at full volume and without any concern for whether the laugh was proportionate to the thing that had prompted it. He had found the world funny in a way that she found inexplicable, and she had loved him for it in the particular way that people loved in others what they couldn't find in themselves. 11 years ago, on a Friday night in November, he had told her a pun. She remembered it perfectly, about a sea captain who couldn't keep his boat in order because he ran a tight ship, which didn't make any grammatical sense. And he'd laughed so much at his own joke that she'd laughed too, Helplessly, the kind of laughter that stopped being about the thing that started it and became its own weather system. They'd been at the kitchen table eating takeout, and she had laughed until her face hurt. The next morning, on the interstate at 8:15, a truck driver who had been awake for 19 hours crossed the center line. Felix died at the scene. She had a T12 incomplete spinal injury, which the surgeons told her meant the damage was not total, that there was function below the injury level, that aggressive rehabilitation, they used the word aggressive with a particular emphasis she had learned to translate, gave her meaningful odds of partial motor recovery. She had declined the aggressive rehabilitation, not consciously at first. At first she was simply in a hospital, and then in an acute care facility, and then she was running her company from a rented accessible apartment while learning, with the specific and furious efficiency she brought to everything, how to move through the world in the way that was now required of her. The rehabilitation she did was functional and sufficient, and at its most demanding, hopeful in a way she could manage. Aggressive hope, the kind that required you to believe the body you were working with was going to give you something back, was a different proposition. She had understood, after some months, that the real reason was simpler than she'd told herself and harder to say. Recovery would require her to believe that her life was going to get better. And better felt, in those years, like a betrayal. As if improving meant she had decided to go on, and going on meant she had decided that the morning of November 14th was not the absolute ending she needed it to be. So she had not aggressively recovered. She had instead built Voss Capital Intelligence into something that required her to be completely present and completely functional and to use everything she had every day, which was a kind of demanding that left no room for the other kind. She had hired good people and trusted them incorrectly and learned from that, and hired differently, and managed the company through 2 recessions and a global disruption, with the particular advantage of a person who had already survived the worst thing and had nothing else to be afraid of. This was the life she ran. This was the structure she had built. She had not laughed since Felix, not because she'd prohibited it, not some dramatic internal edict. She had simply discovered, in the first year, that the approach of laughter was the approach of grief, and so she had, by increments, reorganized herself away from situations that prompted it and away from people who created them. The company was good for this. The company was not, as a rule, funny. She had not thought of herself as a person who was in grief anymore. Grief was what you were in at the beginning. She was simply a person who did not laugh, and who ran a company, and who managed her life with the same precision she brought to everything. And then a maintenance manager had stood in her office with a small wooden dice box on his head, and one sound had escaped before she could catch it. And for 3 days she had been unreasonably aware of her own face. She sat in the garden on a Wednesday morning and watched him work, and listened to the quality of the silence between them, which was not the silence of 2 people avoiding each other. It was the silence of someone who was comfortable being quiet, which was rarer than people seemed to understand. She looked at the rosemary on the south wall, which Felix had planted in his first and only autumn in this house. He had said it would come back every year, and it had. It was woody and tall now, and needed cutting back and reshaping, and she had not asked anyone to touch it for 11 years. "You can cut it back quite hard," she said, without planning to say it. Remy looked up from what he was doing. "Rosemary is tough," she continued. "It doesn't mind. It benefits from it." He looked at the plant for a moment. "I'll do it today," he said. "If that's all right." "That's all right," she said. She watched him work on the rosemary with the careful attention of someone who understood that she was giving him permission for something larger than pruning and was not yet sure she had given it to herself. He shaped the plant back to its essential structure, removed the dead wood, opened the center for air. When he was done, it looked like what it was, something old and productive that had been asking for this kind of attention for a long time. She went back inside before she could say anything else about it. At her desk, she pulled up the quarterly board report that Paul Weston had submitted the day before. Paul sent her reports on a schedule she had set, in a format she had specified, and they were always thorough and well-structured and contained, in the last 2 quarterly reports, a section on company leadership and organizational resilience that was new and that had not been in the format she specified. She read the section carefully. Paul had been with the company for 6 years. He was good at his job. He understood the data intelligence market, and he was precise and reliable, and he had, in the 11 months since she'd begun working fully from home, rather than maintaining office hours 3 days a week, stepped into the space she'd created with the efficiency of water filling a container. She looked at the organizational resilience section. The language was careful. But she had been reading careful language for 11 years, and she could see the shape of what it was doing. It was making a case. Building a record. Patient and thorough and pointing in a direction she recognized. She closed the report and opened a new document and began writing a response that she did not send that day. Outside, through the courtyard window, she could see Remy packing his tools into the truck bed. He worked with the compact efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had the sequence exactly as it needed to be. Her foot, resting on the footrest of her chair, rotated outward at the ankle. It had done this since about the 3rd year. A small, involuntary movement she was only intermittently aware of. Her physio had said once, not urgently, that she might want to have the muscle response documented. She had not followed up on it. She watched Remy's truck pull out of the service entrance. She looked at the wooden box on the shelf. She turned back to her screen and went back to work. The board call was on a Tuesday. Remy wasn't supposed to know about it. Ada mentioned it in passing when she intercepted him on his way to the courtyard, her voice careful with the particular precision she used when conveying information she'd decided he should have, without making it seem like she was interfering. "Ms. Voss has a call with the board from 10 to 12, Ada said. She won't be available and may not come out of the office until early afternoon. It might be better to do the interior work today and save the courtyard for Friday." "Of course," he said. He did the interior work. He repaired the baseboard heater in the small sitting room that had been running loud, a loose bracket, a 20-minute fix, and he calibrated the accessible bathroom thermostatic control, which had been running 3 degrees high according to the monitor. He worked quietly in rooms adjacent to the office and kept the sounds he made to the minimum necessary. He couldn't hear the call. The office was well insulated, and she kept the door closed. What he heard, at 20 past 11, was a silence that had changed character. A work silence sounded different from a post-argument silence, and both of those sounded different from the silence that followed someone receiving information they had not been prepared to receive. He had learned to identify the differences the way you learned any other form of reading, through enough exposure that the distinctions became automatic. He did not go to the office door. He went back to the sitting room and rechecked his work on the baseboard heater, which didn't need rechecking, and waited. Ada appeared in the doorway at 11:40. "I'm going to make tea," Ada said, in a way that meant something else. "Let me know if you need anything," Remy said. At noon, he heard the office door open. He kept working. At 12:15, Ada found him in the hallway. "She's asking if you have time before you leave today," Ada said. "The drainage inspection report? She has a question." He went to the office. Serena was at her desk. The 2 screens were on, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the middle distance in the way that meant she was thinking about something that was not in the room, and when he came in, she refocused with visible effort. "The drainage inspection," she said. "What's your question?" She looked at him. He had the sense she had not, in fact, planned a question about the drainage inspection and was deciding what to say instead. He waited. "Paul Weston," she said finally. "Do you know who he is?" "Your CFO," Remy said. "I've seen his name on the building correspondence list. He's proposing to the board," she said carefully, "that the company benefit from a period of distributed leadership." His phrase. "He means he would run the day-to-day operations, and I would remain as a figurehead." She said figurehead with the flat precision of someone using the word exactly as it had been used at them. He presented this as a wellness consideration. "For my benefit." Remy said nothing. "I founded this company," she said. "I've run it through a financial crisis, a market disruption, and 11 years of managing my operations from this house, because this house is where I work." She looked at the screen. "He has been with the company for 6 years. He's excellent at operations. And he has been preparing this proposal for approximately 8 months, based on the documentation in the board report." Remy looked at her. "What are you going to do?" She looked back at him. "I'm going to fight it," she said. There was no heat in it, no dramatic resolve, It was the tone of someone stating a practical fact about what was going to happen next. But he has framed it as a succession plan rather than a coup, which means I have to respond in kind. I have to demonstrate, on the record, that I am running this company actively and capably from this location, not managing it remotely in a reduced capacity. She paused. I haven't been in the main office in 9 months. He waited. The board will want to see me in person, she said. Within 60 days. At a full leadership meeting. All right, Remy said. My point in telling you this, she said, is that I may need to use the full house more actively in the coming weeks. The first floor conference area has not been used since the renovation. There may be some logistical requirements. I'll inspect it today and send you a list of what it needs, he said. She looked at him for a moment. You haven't asked why I'm telling you. You needed to say it to someone, he said, and Ada already knows. A silence. That's correct, she said. He went to inspect the conference area. The conference area occupied the back portion of the ground floor and had been designed, clearly, with accessibility as the organizing principle rather than an afterthought. The table was the right height. The approach from the hallway was clear and wide. The AV system was built into the wall at a reachable level. The windows looked onto the courtyard. The room was fully functional and had spent 9 months accumulating the specific quality of a space that no one had been using. Not dirty, not damaged, but unlived. He sent Serena a list that evening. AV system needs a firmware update, surface cleaning required, window mechanism stiff from disuse. Conferencing phone needs a software update, ambient temperature control needs adjustment for the room's changed thermal load with the new window seals. She replied in 4 minutes, proceed. Timeline? He replied, everything complete by next Wednesday. She replied, Thursday. I may need it by then. He replied, Wednesday. She didn't respond to that one, which he had come to understand meant he was right. He did the work in the following 3 days. The AV system firmware took an hour and a cable run he hadn't expected. The conference phone update was straightforward. The window mechanisms he serviced one by one. He cleaned the room himself, not because it was his job, strictly, but because Ada's housekeeper schedule was already full, and because doing the job himself was faster than organizing someone else to do it, and he needed it done correctly. On Wednesday afternoon, he ran a test of the complete AV system with his own laptop. The image was crisp, the audio clear, the conferencing integration worked. He confirmed it in the maintenance log and sent Serena a brief update. She replied, good. 1 word. He noted it. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatically, the pattern of his work didn't change. The house still needed maintenance, and Serena still corrected his reports with the same precision, and the doors were closed more often than they were open. But there were differences at the edges, and the peripheral details where the significant things tend to live. She came out to the courtyard more often, not every Wednesday, not on a schedule, but more than she had before. She brought coffee and occasionally mentioned something, a detail about the garden, a question about a component she'd noticed him ordering. Once an observation about the color of the mountains on the eastern horizon that she delivered in the flat tone she used for all observations, in which he answered with equal flatness, and they both looked at the mountains for a moment, and that was that. She had started leaving the office door open when he was in the house. He continued to notice her foot. On a Friday morning in late April, he arrived to find a physical therapy session in progress in the accessible room he'd adapted for that purpose on the first floor, a room he would normally have had access to for a scheduled inspection. He rescheduled the inspection and worked in the courtyard instead. The physio, a woman named Dr. Naipaul, who he saw for the first time that morning when she arrived, small and efficient with a bag over her shoulder, passed through the hallway twice without speaking to him. When she left, she paused briefly at the service entrance where Remy was checking the threshold plate. Good work on this, she said, tapping the ramp with her foot. It's set at exactly the right grade. Thank you, he said. She looked at him with the kind of assessment he'd seen on Ada's face when he'd first arrived. You're the one who fixed the garden. Part of it. She mentioned it, Dr. Naipaul said, which was all she said. And then she left. He stood there for a moment with a small ratchet in his hand and thought about what it meant that Serena Voss had mentioned the garden. He went back to work. The mid-story setback arrived on a Thursday. He came in at 8 and found Ada in the hallway with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, which was controlled worry, the kind that had been managed into something that looked like calm but was vibrating slightly underneath. "The lift," Ada said. He went to the lift. The lift was one of the first things he'd inspected when he'd taken the job, and it had been functioning correctly. He had the service records going back to installation. He had flagged, in week 3, that one of the hydraulic cylinder seals was approaching end of life based on the age and service history, and he had recommended preemptive replacement. Serena had approved the work. He had ordered the part, which was on a 6-week lead time from the manufacturer, and had been waiting. The seal had gone last night. Not catastrophically. The lift hadn't failed in a way that was dangerous. It had sensed the pressure drop and shut itself down, which was what it was designed to do. But it had shut down with Serena in it, between floors, at 10:30 the previous evening. Ada had heard the alert, come immediately, and Serena had spent 22 minutes on the lift phone with the emergency service before a technician arrived to manually lower the car. Serena was fine. She had handled it the way she handled everything, Ada said, without visible distress, with crisp and specific instructions, with complete composure. She had gone to bed afterward. This morning, she was in her office with the door closed. Remy sat in the maintenance room with the service records open in front of him and went through the timeline precisely and without mercy. He had flagged the seal. He had ordered the replacement. The lead time was 6 weeks, and it had been 5 weeks and 4 days. He had planned to install it this coming Monday. 4 days. 4 days short. The previous manager would have waited too. The previous manager had not, in fact, flagged the seal at all. It was in his notes, under monitor. Remy had upgraded it to preemptive replacement in his first week's report. He had done the correct thing in the correct order. He had been 4 days short. He wrote the incident report with complete accuracy, including the part about his own timeline. Then he knocked on the office door. "Come in," Serena said. He came in. She was at her desk. She looked at him with the expression she used when she was waiting to hear something. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't," she said. The seal was flagged. The part was ordered. The lead time was the lead time. "I was 4 days out. I know. I should have flagged it for emergency escalation," he said. "I had the option of ordering from a more expensive supplier with a shorter lead time. I chose the standard supplier. That was a judgment call, and it was wrong, and it cost you 22 minutes on a lift phone at 10:30 at night." She looked at him for a moment. "You're apologizing for a decision that, by the maintenance standards of this house for the past several years, was not only correct, but was more thorough than anything any previous manager had done." "That's not the standard I'm working to," he said. A silence. "No," she said. "I suppose it's not." She looked at her screen, then back at him. "The replacement part arrives Monday. I'll install it Monday morning first thing. I'll have a temporary protocol for the stairs by this afternoon. I'll put it in writing." "Ada has the protocol," Serena said. "I drafted it last night. Then I'll review it and confirm it covers the access points." She nodded. He turned to go. "Mr. Holt," she said. He stopped. 22 minutes, she said without inflection. "I want you to know." It wasn't, she stopped. Reorganized something in herself. I wasn't frightened of the lift. I was annoyed by the time. He understood what she was telling him. That the 22 minutes on the lift were not a trauma. That whatever had happened to her 11 years ago had rearranged her relationship to physical fear in a way that meant being stuck between floors was an inconvenience, not a horror. She was telling him this because she had seen the way he'd walked into the room, and she didn't want him spending the rest of the day carrying something heavier than he needed to. "I'm glad it was only an inconvenience," he said. She looked at him. Something moved across her expression. Not the laughter, not that, but something adjacent to it. A person acknowledging a person. "Fix the lift," she said. "Monday," he said. It was 2 days after the lift incident, on a Saturday morning that Remy was not scheduled to be at the house, that he drove over anyway. He told himself it was to check the temporary stair protocol Ada had arranged, to make sure the handrail placement was correct, and the ground floor bathroom was fully functional as the primary option while the lift was down. These were legitimate reasons. They were also the reasons he gave Ada when she answered the service entrance with raised eyebrows. "She's in the garden," Ada said. He went around to the courtyard. Serena was by the rosemary. She had a small set of pruning shears in her hand, and she was trimming the edges of what he had shaped back in April, working on the growth that had come since. She managed the angle of the chair with the same economy she brought to everything, and she worked on the plant with a precision that told him she had done this before, in a different life when she'd done it standing. He stood in the doorway to the courtyard for a moment before she heard him. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. She didn't look up from the plant. "Came to check the stair protocol." Ada sorted that. "I know, I checked it anyway." She finished trimming a section and looked at the rosemary. "He wanted to grow his own herbs," she said. "It came out the way things came out when someone had been thinking about them for a long time and had stopped trying to hold them back. Not because he cooked particularly well, he just liked the idea of something growing that he'd planted." She looked at the plant. "He didn't live to see it come up in the second year, so I've been seeing it for him." Remy said nothing. "He was funny," she said. "Not the kind of funny that performs it, the kind that noticed things and said them without warning." She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't. There are things I've stopped doing because the approach to them was the approach to him. And that's not a route I could." She stopped. "The laugh," she said, flat and direct. "The other week. In the office." He waited. "It wasn't the first time I'd felt it coming," she said. "It was the first time something was fast enough that it got through." He looked at the rosemary. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. She looked at him. "It happened," he said. "That's all it has to be, for now." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were still on the pruning shears. The rosemary was between them. "Felix," she said. The name of her husband, said plainly. His name was Felix. He died 11 years ago. And I stopped laughing because every time I got near it, I got near him. And I wasn't. I didn't know how to survive that road again. He nodded. "I'm still not sure I do," she said. "You don't have to survive the whole road," he said. "Just the next part." She was quiet for a long time. He let the quiet be what it was. "The iris bed looks good," she said finally. "Give it another 2 weeks," he said. "Then you'll see the color." She nodded. She went back to the rosemary. He pulled a chair from the small stack near the wall and sat down, not too close, and let her work in the quiet that was, by now, the particular quiet of two people who had stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. In the weeks after the board call, the shape of Serena's days changed. She was in the office more hours. Not more hours technically, she had always worked long hours. But she was working on different things that required the particular concentration of someone building a case. Remy knew this because the Friday summaries she requested became Thursday summaries, and because Ada mentioned once, with the careful neutrality she maintained in all house-related observations, that the light under the office door had been on at 2 a.m. He didn't ask about it. He did, on the following Monday, service the blackout blind mechanism in the office. It had been catching slightly on one side, so that when she worked at night, the room was completely sealed from the street. She noticed. She said nothing. He logged it. Paul Weston sent a follow-up to the board on a Wednesday. Remy knew this because Serena's door was closed from 7 a.m, and Ada served lunch on a tray outside it, which had not happened before. He worked through the morning in the garden and came back in the afternoon for the SVAC filter schedule and completed it without going near the office. At 4:30, she opened the door. "I need to use the conference room next week," she said. "Not for a meeting, for recording. I need to produce 4 quarterly updates for the board in video format, because Paul's proposal included a formal documentation request, and I'm going to respond in kind. The AV setup in there handles that," he said. "The camera angle is good from the north-facing position. I know. I need the audio to be clean. The ambient sound in the room, I can hear the street traffic from the east side." He thought about it. "Acoustic panel on the east wall. I can have it done by end of week. It's a 1-day installation." "How much?" He told her. It was within the quarterly budget. "Do it," she said. "And I'll need the room from 7 each morning next week. I work better early. I'll adjust my schedule. he said. I'll come in afternoons those days. She looked at him. That's a change to your standard days. It's not a problem, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something in the way she looked at him on these practical exchanges that had shifted over the past weeks. Not warmer exactly, but less armored. The way a room felt different when you opened a window, even if the temperature didn't change. Fine, she said, and went back to the office. Paul Weston came to the house on a Thursday. He hadn't announced himself. Ada answered the door and came to find Remy in the maintenance room with the expression of someone delivering a message she wished she didn't have. Mr. Weston, Ada said. He says he has something for Miss Voss. She's expecting the grocery delivery. I don't think she knows he's here. Where is he? Front entrance. I left him at the door. Remy went to the front entrance. Paul Weston was 54, broad-shouldered, the kind of trim that came from the specific combination of money and discipline. And he had the expression of someone who was accustomed to being admitted to things. He held a manila envelope, and he looked at Remy with the controlled curiosity of someone cataloging information. You must be the facilities manager, Paul said. I am, Remy said. Ms. Voss isn't expecting visitors today. I have documents for her. I can take them. A brief hesitation. I'd prefer to deliver them personally. I'll let her know you're here, Remy said. She'll tell me if she wants to see you. Paul looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating their assessment of a situation they had expected to be simpler. You're very literal about the role, he said. That's accurate, Remy said. He went to the office door and knocked once. Yes, Serena said. Paul Weston is at the front door. He has documents for you. A pause of approximately 4 seconds. Tell him I'll send Ada for the envelope. He went back to the front entrance. She'll have Ada collect the documents, he said. Paul Weston looked at the house behind Remy for a moment. Not at the envelope. At the house. The look of a man taking the temperature of a situation and not entirely liking what the thermometer read. Tell her, Paul said, that the board response deadline is the 14th. I'll tell her, Remy said. Ada came and took the envelope. Paul left. Remy watched the car pull away from the gate and then went back to the maintenance room. 10 minutes later, Ada came to the doorway. She'd like a coffee, Ada said, which was the signal she used when Serena wanted company without the formality of summoning it. He made 2 coffees and brought them to the office. Serena was holding the envelope open but not reading it. She was looking at the wall. How much time do you have? She asked. As much as you need, he said. He handed her the coffee and sat in the chair across the desk. She told him about it in the flat way she had told him things since the courtyard, not building a case for sympathy, just laying out the facts, because the facts needed to be said to someone who would hear them without redirecting them. Paul's proposal to the board had gained traction with 2 of the 5 board members, both of whom had joined in the past 3 years, and whose primary experience of Voss Capital Intelligence was the company as Paul ran it day to day. Her original board members, the ones who'd known her, who'd been with the company since the beginning, were split. She had 63 days to demonstrate to the board's satisfaction that she was operationally in command of her company. You are operationally in command of your company, Remy said. I know that, she said. But I've allowed the perception to drift because the office felt, she stopped, because coming back felt like more than I was ready for. He understood what she meant without saying so. The video documentation is a start, she said. But Paul's advantage is physical presence. He is in the building. He chairs the Monday stand-ups. He represents the company externally. And I've let that happen because... She looked at her coffee. I had reasons. What do you need? He said. She looked at him. I need to go back to the office, she said. At least twice a month for the next 2 months. I need to chair the meetings in person. I need to show the board what I show this house, that I run it. Then go, he said. I haven't been in that building in 9 months, she said. The last time I was there, I left early. Not because of anything structural. Because she looked at the wooden box on the shelf. The office was where I was when the hospital called. I've had a separate office set up here ever since. He looked at her. Do you want to go back to that building? No, she said. But I need to. Those are 2 separate things, he said. One's harder than the other. But they don't cancel each other out. She looked at him for a long time. The acoustic panel, she said finally. It'll be done by Friday, he said. And the conference room. Ready? She looked back at her coffee. I'll go to the office on the 12th, she said. It was the first time she had named the date of something difficult out loud in what he suspected was a very long time. I'll make sure the accessible parking is confirmed with your building management, he said. And the lift in that building, send me the service record and I'll have it checked before you arrive. She looked at him. Something in her expression did the thing he had been seeing it do more and more often, the thing where the armor moved aside, just slightly, and the person behind it was briefly and completely visible. Thank you, she said, simply, without qualification. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He went back to work. The day she went to the office, Remy was at the house. He had not planned to be there. It was a Monday, which was a scheduled day, but he had planned to be in the courtyard for the bulk of it rather than in the house. He stayed in the house because Ada was there alone, which was not unusual, but there was a quality to Ada's stillness that morning that made him want to be nearby. He did not watch the clock. He serviced the baseboard heater in the upstairs room that had begun running intermittently, and he checked the window mechanisms in the second bedroom, and he organized the contractor invoices for the monthly report, which was due at the end of the week. Ada brought him lunch at noon. She texted, Ada said. She said the parking was exactly where it needed to be. He looked up from the invoices. Good. She said she chaired the meeting. He nodded. She said Paul Weston's face was worth the 9 months. Something shifted in his chest. Not quite a laugh. The approach of one. I imagine it was, he said. Ada took the empty lunch tray and left. He looked at the window for a moment. The iris bed outside was at the edge of what he'd described. 2 weeks, and you'll see the color. He could see the color from here. Dark purple, opening in the early afternoon light. He went back to the invoices. But the lightness stayed with him for the rest of the day, and it had nothing to do with the iris bed. B came to the house on a Wednesday in late May, which was not planned. Remy had been at the house since 8, working on a drainage issue in the lower courtyard that had appeared after 3 days of rain. He was halfway through the work when his phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Ferreira. The school had called. B was sick. Could she pick B up? He called back. She could. He sent her the school address. Then he texted the school to confirm Mrs. Ferreira as the emergency contact and went back to the drainage. At 10:30, Mrs. Ferreira texted back. B didn't want to go to her house. Wanted to come to her dad. He read the message. He replied, I'm working. Mrs. Ferreira replied, she knows. He put his phone back in his pocket and thought about it for approximately 45 seconds. Then texted Ada. Is it possible that my daughter comes to the house for a few hours this morning? She's not seriously ill. School sent her home as a precaution. She can sit in the maintenance room or the courtyard. She won't be in anyone's way. Ada replied, of course. Tell Mrs. Ferreira I'll meet them at the gate. He texted Mrs. Ferreira the gate code. He didn't go and tell Serena. He told himself it was because she was working and it wasn't something that required her involvement, which was true and also not the only reason. B arrived at 10:45, wearing her school uniform, carrying her backpack, and looking, Remy thought, approximately 15% less ill than she'd appeared when he dropped her at school at 7:45, which meant this was probably a precautionary dismissal rather than a genuine emergency. She had a mild flush and slightly glassy eyes, which was what she always looked like when she was coming down with a minor cold rather than actually having one. Hi, Dad, she said. Hi, B, he said. How do you feel? Fine, she said, which was what she said when she was fine and also what she said when she wasn't and didn't want to discuss it. Are you fine or fine? He said. Fine, fine, she said. Not sick. Just warm. He felt her forehead. Not alarming. A slight warmth. Okay, he said. You can sit in the courtyard while I finish the drainage. I'll set up a blanket. Can I read in the garden? Yes, quietly. He set her up on the bench in the courtyard with the blanket from his truck and her book, which was a thick one about horses, and he went back to the drainage. She read. He worked. It was, in fact, completely fine. He didn't hear Serena come out. He was kneeling on the far side of the garden, clearing a blockage in the lower channel, and he became aware of a particular stillness that was different from the normal courtyard quiet. He looked up. Serena had come out through the garden door and stopped about 6 feet from where B was sitting on the bench. B was looking at her with the open, calm assessment of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. Not rude, just direct. She had the book closed on her lap. "Hello," B said. Serena looked at her. The chair was at eye level with the bench, which meant they were roughly at eye level with each other, which Remy could see Serena noticing. "Hello," Serena said. "Who are you?" "Beatrice Holt," B said. "But everyone calls me B. My dad works here." "I know," Serena said. "I mean that I know who your dad is. I didn't know he had a daughter named Beatrice." "I like the full name," B said, "but only when someone says it nicely." Something shifted on Serena's face. Not quite a smile. The approach of one. "Beatrice," Serena said. Carefully, the way the name was meant to be said. "Yes," B said, satisfied. "Are you the woman who owns the house?" "I am," Serena said. B looked at the wheelchair. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Remy had come to his feet on the far side of the garden. He was deciding whether to intervene when Serena answered. "Being in the chair?" Serena asked. "No," B said. She pointed. She was pointing at the framed photograph on the small table Serena kept on the covered section of the courtyard, a photo that had been there for years. Ada had told him once. That moved from inside to out and back again with the seasons, because Serena couldn't decide whether she wanted it near her or at a distance. It was a photograph of Serena and a man. He was laughing at something. She was looking at him rather than at the camera. They looked like people who did not know they were being photographed, which was what made it what it was. "Does it hurt?" Bea said, looking at the picture. Serena was very still. "Yes," she said. The word came out simply, without defense, the way truth came out when a child asked for it, with genuine curiosity rather than social performance. "Every day." Bea nodded slowly, and the way she processed information she was sorting into the right category. "My dad has one of those," she said. "In his room. He thinks I don't know it hurts him." Serena looked at her. "It's okay to know," Bea said. "It doesn't make it better. But it's okay." Remy was standing with his hand on the courtyard gate, and his throat was full of something he did not know what to do with. He watched Serena's face. He watched the thing that moved across it. Not sorrow, not exactly, but a kind of recognition. The expression of someone who has been handed a mirror they didn't know they needed. "Thank you, Beatrice," Serena said, not ironically, with complete gravity. "B," said, and went back to her book. Serena stayed in the courtyard. She didn't look at Remy, and he didn't look at her. He went back to the drainage. Serena eventually moved to the far end of the courtyard, near the rosemary, and sat there in the quiet. At noon, Ada appeared with sandwiches. She served 3 portions without comment, which told Remy that this was not a surprise. They ate in the courtyard. All of them. B told Serena about the horse book, which had a specific subplot about a mare and her foal that B considered deeply compelling. And Serena asked questions about it with the same focused attention she gave to everything, which meant B spent the next 20 minutes providing a highly detailed summary of chapters she'd already read. "She likes good listeners," Remy said. "Most people do," Serena said. B looked at both of them and then went back to her sandwich. After lunch, B fell asleep on the bench with her book open on her chest, which was a thing she could do with the absolute efficiency of the very young, and the courtyard went quiet. Serena sat in the afternoon sun with her coffee and said, "After a while, you do the same thing." "What thing?" Remy said. "Keep the hurt in a room," she said, "where the children can't see it." "But they can see the door." He looked at his daughter, sleeping in the May sun. "She's told me that," he said. "About the door?" "She's right," Serena said. He looked at the photograph on the table. He looked at Serena. She was looking at the photograph too, openly, the way she hadn't been able to look at it for a long time. "Is this the first time," he said, "that you've been able to look at it and not look away?" She considered that honestly. "Not the first," she said, But the first time it didn't feel like something I had to do instead of something that was. She paused. Possible. He nodded. B's right, she said. It doesn't make it better. No, he said. But it doesn't have to, she said, quietly. No, he said. It doesn't. They sat in the courtyard until B woke up and immediately returned to chapter 14. And then until B finished chapter 14 and wanted to tell them both what happened in it. And Remy listened and Serena listened, and the afternoon light moved slowly across the garden, and no one was in any hurry for it to end. The venture happened gradually, and then all at once. It had been Remy's idea, in the most indirect possible way, which was how Serena later described it when she told the story to Ada, who told it to Remy, who was unsure whether to be amused or embarrassed. It had started with a conversation about the lift. Remy had completed the seal replacement and restored the lift to full function and written the service report, and in the service report he had included a note about the timeline failure. Not as a correction to himself, because the ordering had been correct, but as an observation about the constraint. The part was only available from one manufacturer's distributor with a 6-week lead time. He had written, consider establishing a relationship with the commercial lift service contractor who maintains inventory for common component types on behalf of residential clients. The cost savings over the current reactive model would offset the relationship cost within 18 months. Serena had read the report and called him into the office. This note, she said. The lift service relationship, he said. I'm interested in the model, she said. Not for the house. For Voss Capital. We do market intelligence work for several property firms. The maintenance contracting market is fragmented and inefficient in exactly the way you're describing. Residential and small commercial clients with high-end accessible modifications don't have good options for proactive service contracts. He looked at her. I'm not proposing we build a business, she said immediately, which meant she was. I'm saying the data problem in this market is one we could map. As a research project initially. Scope the market, build the intelligence picture, identify whether there's a structural gap and what it would take to fill it. You'd do that with Voss Capital? With a separate research function under VCI, she said. Small. Purpose-built. I'd run it from here alongside the main operations, which I've been meaning to restructure anyway. He looked at her for a moment. Why are you telling me? Because you're the one who identified the problem, she said. And because I'm going to need someone who understands the operational side of what I'd be mapping. The maintenance contracting world, the suppliers, the accessible housing requirements, how the systems actually work on the ground. She looked at him steadily. I'm not proposing you change your job. I'm proposing an arrangement where you consult on the operational research, on your own schedule for a fee. He thought about this. This is something you want to do, he said. Not just strategically. She was quiet for a moment. Felix, she said carefully, spent 10 years working in accessible housing development. Before the accident. He believed that the market was broken for people who needed it most. She looked at the wooden box on the shelf. I have the data capability to understand whether he was right. I've been looking for a reason to use it for a long time. He looked at the box too. At the brass latch. I'll consult on the operational research, he said. Good, she said. That was how it began. Over the following 6 weeks, Serena built the research framework, and Remy contributed the ground-level knowledge that made it specific. He provided contacts in the contracting world, explained the economics of a residential service call versus a commercial one, walked her through the decision logic of how facilities managers selected contractors. She built an intelligence model that mapped the market gap with the precision of 11 years of data expertise. And what she found was that Felix had been exactly right. The market was fragmented and expensive and inaccessible in the specific ways that made it hardest for the people who most needed it. They worked on it 3 mornings a week, in the conference room she had updated, sitting across the table in the clean acoustics of the soundproof space. She had coffee, he had tea. They worked well together in the way that people worked well together when one of them was precise and systematic and the other was practical and thorough, and neither of them wasted time. He noticed in this period that she laughed. Not the full, unguarded laugh of the dice box that had been a single escaping thing, but something else. The contained, dry, private laugh of a person who finds something genuinely amusing and doesn't conceal it as carefully as she once might have. He said something wrong about a particular supplier's pricing model once. Confidently wrong. And she looked at him over her laptop screen with a look that he recognized after a moment as enjoyment. "You were certain," she said. "I was wrong," he said. "You were very certain while you were wrong," she said. And something in her voice had the texture of a person who is remembering how to be amused. Not performing it, just finding it. He didn't remark on it. The venture, which Serena named Voss Accessible Systems, keeping it under the VCI umbrella deliberately, had a research phase and then, faster than either of them expected, a practical one. One of the property firms that was a VCI client read the preliminary intelligence report and asked, immediately, whether Voss could recommend a service provider for their accessible residential portfolio. The answer was no. There was no good provider, which was the point. But the question meant there was a market ready to be served. "You could be that provider," she said. He looked at her across the conference table. "Not on your own," she said. "Not from the beginning. But you have the operational knowledge, the supplier relationships, the contracting experience. Voss could build a preferred provider network. You could be its first member and its technical director." "You're offering me a job," he said. "I'm offering you a business," she said. "The retainer here would stay in place for another year. This house still needs a facilities manager. But this would be something that's yours, built on the intelligence work we've done here." He was quiet for a long time. "Felix would have liked this," he said finally. She looked at the wall. "Yes," she said simply, "he would have." "All right," he said. She looked at him. And for the first time he could see it clearly. Not the relief, not the professional satisfaction, but something else. Something that was about the two of them, and what they had built in this conference room, and the garden, and the maintenance room, and all the ordinary places where important things had happened without being announced. "All right," she said. And she went back to her screen. But she was something different as she did it. Something that was, if he had to name it, open. Bea asked the question on a Sunday. She had come to the house twice more since the Wednesday in May. Once because Ada had invited her for afternoon tea, which Ada had organized, and Serena had apparently approved without Remy being consulted. And once because Remy was doing an inspection that ran over his expected time and Mrs. Ferreira couldn't stay late. On the Sunday in question, they were all in the courtyard. Remy finishing a job on the gate mechanism, Ada inside, Serena with a book she was not reading, Bea doing what she did when she was comfortable somewhere, which was to establish herself at a point equidistant from all adults and perform her own activities with the air of someone who is available for conversation, but not requiring it. "Are you going to be a family?" Bea said. She said it the way she said most things, without particular inflection, with the directness of someone who has not yet learned that some questions are supposed to take longer. Remy kept his hands on the gate mechanism. He did not look at Serena. Serena looked at Bea. "Why do you ask?" Serena said. "Because you're both sad the same way," Bea said, which was the most devastating piece of analysis she had ever delivered, and she delivered it the way she delivered everything, without apparent awareness of the scale of what she'd said. And when people are sad the same way, they usually help each other. "That's true," Serena said. And because, Bea said, going back to her drawing, you both look at each other when you think the other one isn't looking. Remy put down the tool he was holding. He looked at Serena. She was looking at him. "I think," Serena said, carefully and precisely, "that we are figuring that out." Bea nodded. She had found the answer sufficient. She went back to her drawing, which was of a horse. Remy picked up his tool and went back to the gate. But his hands were not completely steady, and he was careful about the mechanism for reasons that had nothing to do with the gate. The weeks between Bea's question and the board meeting ran the way the best working weeks ran, with the quality of days that were too full to notice passing. Serena worked the video documentation with the kind of focused intensity that reminded him, watching her through the conference room glass on the days he arrived early, of the look on her face the first day he'd come to this house and she had assessed him across her desk. She was not performing competence for the board. She was simply being competent on camera, which was a harder skill than it sounded. The difference between someone who was capable and someone who could communicate their capability to a skeptical audience was the difference between being right and being believed. She was right, and she was believed. The board received her documentation package on a Tuesday and scheduled the in-person meeting for the following Friday. She told Remy on Wednesday morning in the conference room at 7 over coffee and tea. Friday, she said. The building? Yes, she didn't say anything else about it for a moment. Then, the last time I was in that office. The call from the hospital was on my mobile at 11:47 in the morning. He listened. I remember the time because I'd checked my phone for a message from Felix, and then the call came through. She looked at the table. He always texted if he was going to be late. He was late that morning to a breakfast meeting. I was checking to see if he'd messaged. Remy sat with that. I've been in the building twice since then, she said. Both times I went back early. There's nothing wrong with the building structurally. It's the association, the spatial memory. You went last month, he said. You chaired the meeting. For 2 hours, she said. And I left immediately after. You chaired the meeting, he said again. She looked at him. He could see her register what he was doing. Not offering comfort, not redirecting, just reflecting the fact of what she'd already done. The fact that she had already survived the building. Twice, for shorter and now longer durations. That the association was real, and so was the capacity to act in spite of it. I'll be there the full day Friday, she said. Yes, he said. And afterward, she said carefully, I may need the garden to be available. It'll be available, he said. She nodded once and went back to her documentation. On Friday, Remy was at the house. He had checked the week before that the accessible parking on her building street was confirmed through the city's permit system and that the lift in her office building had been serviced within the last 2 months, which it had. He had done both things without being asked and without telling her he'd done them. He had told Ada, who had not told Serena, and the thing had simply been what it needed to be. He worked through the morning in the house. He serviced the window mechanisms in the upstairs rooms. He completed the quarterly contractor billing review. He prepared the maintenance plan for the next quarter, which was a document Serena reviewed and approved, and which he'd begun structuring not just as a task list, but as a strategic document with projected costs and decision points, because that was the form that was most useful to her. Ada brought him lunch at noon. She texted at 11, Ada said. What did she say? Ada said. She said Paul Weston arrived at the meeting with a formal motion to put the leadership proposal to a vote. Remy looked up. And? She said she let him finish presenting the motion, Ada said. Then she presented 4 months of quantified operational data, the research initiative under VAS, the new client acquisition projections, and the accessible systems contract that North Point Property Group had signed last week. The board voted? 4-1 in her favor, Ada said. Paul Weston cast the 1. Remy looked at the quarterly maintenance plan on his desk. Good, he said. Ada didn't say anything more. She took his empty cup and went back to the kitchen. He finished the maintenance plan. He printed it. He set it on the corner of his desk in the maintenance room, and then went to the courtyard and sat on the bench in the afternoon sun and waited for what he'd said would be available. She came home at 3. She came through the garden door directly, which she hadn't done before. She usually came through the house and out from the interior, and she came in without saying anything. She went to the far end of the courtyard to the rosemary, and she put her hand on it the way she sometimes did, flat against the woody stems, and she stood there, or sat there, the word was the same in substance, with her eyes closed for a moment. Remy didn't speak. After a while, she said, 4-1. I heard, he said. He voted against on principle, she said. He said so. He said he believed what he believed about the company's needs, and he wanted that recorded. She was quiet. I respect him for that. I don't agree with him, but I respect the consistency. That's fair, Remy said. She opened her eyes and looked at the rosemary. When Felix died, she said, I decided I was going to save the company because I didn't know what else to do. It was the thing I could control, and so I controlled it absolutely, and it kept me present. In the world. In the days. She looked at the wooden box, which she'd brought outside for the first time in a very long time, and which sat on the garden table in the afternoon light. I thought it was what I was doing instead of grieving. I think now it might have been how I was grieving, the particular kind that looks like nothing but staying. He looked at the box. "Vass is real," she said. "What we built in that conference room is real, and it's the first thing that's been mine and not just grief wearing the shape of a company." He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I know what I'm saying." She held his eyes. "I'm saying that what we built in there, I couldn't have built without you. Not because of the operational knowledge, though that, but because," she stopped, found the word, "because you showed up. Every day. And you didn't make me explain myself. And I need you to know that I know the difference between that and something ordinary." He looked at her for a long time. "I know you know," he said. She looked at the rosemary. Then she looked at the box. She reached out and picked it up and turned it over in her hands and opened the brass latch, and inside the box were Felix's game dice, small, ivory-colored, worn smooth from use, and she looked at them for a moment. Then she turned the box over and looked at the lid, which she had kept facing the wall for 11 years. Felix plus Serena, June 4. She looked at it. Then she turned the box face up and set it back on the garden table. She didn't say anything about it. After a while, Bea arrived from school. She had started sometimes coming directly to the house when Remy was working late. A thing that had emerged without being formally arranged. And she came through the gate and into the courtyard with her backpack and immediately noticed the box. "What's that?" she said. "A dice box," Serena said. "Can we play?" Serena looked at the box, then at Remy, then at Bea. "Yes," she said. "Do you know any dice games?" "Dad taught me one," Bea said. "It's called Mexico." "I don't know that one," Serena said. "I'll teach you," Bea said, sitting down at the garden table with the decisive confidence of a person who has not yet learned that teaching adults is supposed to be intimidating. Remy sat across from Serena, and Bea dealt out the rules to both of them with complete seriousness, and they played for 45 minutes in the May afternoon light. And Serena lost every round, because Bea played with a ferocity that was disproportionate to the game's stakes and deeply admirable. And somewhere in the middle of the fourth round, Serena made a catastrophically ill-advised move, and Bea said, "That was the wrongest move I've ever seen." And the quality of the silence that followed was the one that Remy had learned to recognize. And this time nothing stopped it. Not completely. Not the open, full-volume laugh of a person who has never had a reason to guard themselves. But something real. Something that came from below the chest. Something that arrived without being examined first. She laughed, and it escaped. And she didn't catch it. And for 4 or 5 seconds, she was simply Serena Voss laughing at a dice game in her garden on a Wednesday afternoon. Bea beamed. Remy didn't say anything. He just looked at his daughter and felt something that had no name, which was its own kind of answer. The physio session on the last Thursday in June ended differently than the others. Remy knew this because he heard it from the hallway where he was working on the threshold sensor that had been triggering intermittently. He heard Dr. Naipaul's voice, not the words, the tone, and then a silence, and then Serena's voice, and then a longer silence. He kept working on the sensor. Ada appeared from the kitchen and stood very still in the hallway, which told him she had also heard something. The physio session room door opened at 12:10. "Doctor." Naipaul came out first. She walked to the water dispenser in the hallway and filled a glass and brought it back into the room without looking at either Remy or Ada, which told him the moment in there was still happening. He finished the sensor adjustment, logged the fix, and sat on the low stool in the hallway with his toolkit and waited. At 12:30, Serena's chair came through the door. She came into the hallway. She stopped when she saw him. He looked at her. Something was different. He had been looking at her face for 4 months, and he had learned its surface the way he had learned the surfaces of this house, precisely, from the evidence of use and age and intention. What was on her face now was not something he had seen before. Not shock. Something that had moved through shock on its way to somewhere else. The session, she said. He waited. She had me do a set of bilateral resistance exercises, Serena said. For the lower limb. She's been working up to it. She paused. I was able to load on my left. Meaningfully, he understood what that meant before she finished saying it. Dr. Naipaul says. Serena said, carefully, that the movement picture has been changing, that the incomplete classification was always, that there was always, that what's been happening in the rehabilitation over the last several months is more than she expected, and that what she saw today is, she stopped. She thinks there's a path. A path to? He said, though he knew. Standing, she said. Not a timeline, not a promise, but a physiological basis for a structured recovery effort that she would have said 6 months ago wasn't. She stopped again. She says the movement in my ankle that she's been documenting is part of a broader returning signal pattern, and today the resistance response was significant enough that she wants to bring in a specialist. He looked at her. I haven't wanted this, she said, for a long time. I've told myself I made peace with the chair, and it was true, I had. But what I'd also made peace with was the idea that I didn't deserve to want anything to be better. She looked at the wooden box, which was still on the garden table outside, face up, the engraving catching the afternoon light. I think that's changing. Yes, he said. I'm going to say yes to the specialist, she said. He nodded. That's all I wanted to say, she said. She looked at him. I wanted to say it to someone. I know, he said. Ada appeared from the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of tea, which she placed on the hall table, and then disappeared back into the kitchen without a word. They drank the tea in the hallway, both of them looking at the garden through the glass door, where the iris bed was fully in bloom. Deep purple, healthy, standing straight above the soil, Voss Accessible Systems launched its first service contracts in September. By October, it had 12 clients in the Denver metro area, all residential accessible properties, all managed through a service model that Remy had built, and Serena had structured into a replicable operational framework. The data intelligence that Voss Capital Intelligence had developed on the market gap was now feeding the business decisions of the business that filled the gap, which was exactly what good market intelligence was supposed to do and almost never did in practice. Paul Weston left Voss Capital in August. He did it professionally. With a formal resignation and a transition period and the specific dignity of a man who had lost an argument he'd been certain he'd win and had the character to accept it without bitterness. Serena said, at his farewell, that he was one of the sharpest operational minds she'd worked with, and she meant it, and he knew she meant it. And they shook hands with the formality of 2 people who respected each other more than they liked each other, which was sufficient. The specialist Dr. Naipaul brought in was a spinal rehabilitation physician at the University of Colorado Hospital. He reviewed the imaging history, the therapy notes, the documented movement records, and the resistance response data from June. And he told Serena that the picture was consistent with an incomplete injury that had never been fully rehabilitated, and that, in his clinical opinion, she was a candidate for an intensive recovery program. He was careful about language. He used words like meaningful functional improvement and significant probability and cannot guarantee. He did not say the word walking until she asked him directly. There is a reasonable basis, he said, to pursue that as a functional goal. She said yes. The program was 16 weeks. It was, as her original physio team had described, and she had spent 11 years avoiding. Aggressive. It required 3 sessions per week with Dr. Naipaul's team, a daily home exercise regimen, and a level of focused physical effort that was, in some ways, the most demanding thing she had done since building her company. She did it the way she did everything, with complete, organized, methodical commitment. Remy drove her, on the days the appointments ran past when she would otherwise have driven herself, because the first-floor accessible bathroom needed updating and he was coordinating the contractor. This was his explanation. Ada accepted it without comment. Bea came with him twice, both times without particular planning. She sat in the waiting room with her horsebook and did not ask questions about what was happening behind the doors, which was both her natural temperament and, he suspected, a deliberate kindness on her part. On a Tuesday morning in November, 14 weeks into the program, Serena stood. Remy wasn't there. He found out from Ada, who called him at 8:30 with a brevity that communicated something she didn't trust herself to say more of. She said, Dr. Naipaul called. 31 seconds. He sat in his truck in the parking lot where he'd been about to start his morning, and he put his hands on the steering wheel, and he looked at the mountain outline on the eastern horizon, which was the same line of mountains he'd been looking at his whole life from this city. Unchanged, fixed, enormous, 31 seconds. He drove to the house. Ada opened the service entrance before he reached the door and didn't ask why he'd come on a non-scheduled day. Serena was in the office, which was where he'd expected her to be because she worked the way she worked regardless of what else was happening. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He came in. She was at her desk. She looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. On the shelf, the wooden box sat face up in the light. 31 seconds, he said. 31 seconds, she said. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't say, "I knew you could." He said nothing at all for a moment, which was the right thing, because some things were too large to be spoken toward directly and needed to be respected by the quality of the silence around them. "The iris bed," she said finally. "What about it? It needs the bulbs separated again before winter." She was looking at him steadily. "You said it needs doing every 2 to 3 years. "It does," he said. "Then stay," she said. "Not about the iris bed. About all of it." He looked at her. "If you want to," she said. He said, "Yes." She looked at the box. At the photograph on the table outside, visible through the courtyard window, the one of Felix laughing. Then she looked back at him. "Good," she said. And she was, he thought, something he hadn't seen her be in 4 months of knowing her, and that she perhaps hadn't been in a very long time. She was glad. This is what Remy Holt never told anyone about the day with the drawer and the wooden box. He had known. When he stood up too fast and cracked his head, and the box fell and landed on him, and he stood there in the silence with the brass-latched walnut dice box sitting on top of his head like the world's smallest crown, he had known. In the particular way that people sometimes know things they can't explain, that he was not in an ordinary moment. He had known because of the quality of the stillness, because of the way she had stopped in the doorway, because of the 8 weeks of careful morning work and corrected log entries and courtyard garden and thin cold coffee that had preceded it. 8 weeks of showing up and being useful and not making anything of anything, and he had understood. Standing there with the box on his head and tears in his eyes from the impact and a growing awareness that the situation was genuinely ridiculous, that the thing he was possibly doing in that moment was making a woman who had not laughed in 11 years laugh. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't tried. He had simply been a person doing his job in the presence of another person, and the job had gone temporarily sideways, and the moment had required nothing of him except to be exactly what he was, undignified and present and real, and that had been enough. The box on his head. The silence. The one escaping sound. He had made a note in his maintenance log that day: cabinet drawer, east wall, runner straightened and lubricated, function restored. Nothing else. Nothing about the box or the sound or the way something had crossed her face that he'd been thinking about ever since. Some things were too important to put in the maintenance log. This is what it means to refuse. Not to storm through, not to perform strength, not to arrive with declarations. To show up. To read the maintenance record. To reformat the headers. To replant the iris bulbs at 6 inches, the same as they were. To fix the thing that needs fixing and come back on Monday and do it again. Remy Holt did not save Serena Voss. He did not rescue her from grief or from her chair or from the careful structure she had built to survive both. She had survived all of those things herself, in her own way, on her own terms, for 11 years before he arrived at her gate. What he did was stay. What he did was be the kind of man who read the previous tenant's maintenance log, who noticed a foot moving at an ankle, who left a fishing fly on a library desk. No, wait, that was someone else's story. What he did was tie knots correctly, in the places where the correct knot was what was needed, and trust that the structure would hold. He did not know he was going to say something stupid. He only knew that the drawer was stuck and he was the person who fixed things. And in that, without knowing it and without trying, he was the first thing in 11 years to be simple and genuine enough to get through. Not because he was brave, because he was real. And real, it turned out, was the thing she had been waiting for long enough that she'd stopped knowing she was waiting.